Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 136, Erosion 4. Back to the present. To the second mountain of the Five Mountains Alliance, the blind man Wai Mengqion, who was perplexed by the dead Jiheng, Mok Jiangun said with a smirk. You must be greatly disappointed that the result is different from what you intended. You bastard. You seem to have used your head a lot, but it's a pity. It would have worked smoothly with others. Grind. The blind man Wai Mengqion gnashed his teeth. Although he didn't know what had happened, one thing was certain. His scheme had not worked. It was a tactic he had calculated through dozens of simulations. He had prepared to deal with most variables, so how did he escape it? However, the important thing was that it wasn't a situation to question the cause of the failed scheme. Grip. Strength entered Wai Mengqion's hand holding the sword hilt. Now that the original plan had gone awry, the only answer was to kill the fellow himself. Otherwise, the matter would go beyond his control. Wai Mengqion quietly opened his mouth. I don't know how you escaped suspicion, but coming here was a huge mistake. A huge mistake? Swish. As soon as Mok Jiangun's questioning ended, Wai Mengqion's sword cut through the air. In that fleeting moment, Mok Jiangun had gained about half a step of distance. Thanks to that, the sword narrowly missed slicing Mok Jiangun's neck and brushed past. You're fast. At Mok Jiangun's words, Wai Mengqion said nothing. Unlike last time when he had tried to test his martial prowess, this time he had slashed with the intent to kill, but he didn't expect him to dodge it. He definitely surpassed the peak realm. He probably estimated him to be at the early stage of transcendent realm. Considering the few exchanges they had and the strength infused in the sword, it seemed certain. This alone was surprising. Just 17. For a guy not even in his prime to reach this level, his talent had to be acknowledged. However, you will die here. Whoosh. Wai Mengqion's sword rushed towards Mok Jiangun, drawing a complex trajectory. Mok Jiangun's eyes shook at a rapid speed as the sword became even faster. This was the first time he had properly faced a master since gaining enlightenment at the Corpse Blood Valley report. Indeed, Wai Mengqion's swordsmanship was beyond imagination. Swish 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 swish. It was not at a level he could dodge. Thus, Mok Jiangun also utilized defensive sword techniques to counter Wai Mengqion's fierce attack. Clang 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 clang. The swords of the two clashed more than a dozen times in an instant, and blue sparks flew in the darkness. Each time the swords collided, Mok Jiangun's body was pushed back little by little. This clearly meant he was inferior in internal energy. Even though he reached the transcendent realm with innate martial talent, he can't avoid two weaknesses after all. The first was internal energy. When talking about the level of internal energy, the reason for mentioning the number of years was that the accumulated amount increased as time passed. No matter how much Mok Jiangun had reached a high level with outstanding talent, he couldn't match someone who had accumulated internal energy for decades like himself. In the second, clang clang clang. Just as they were clashing almost evenly, Wai Mengqion's sword suddenly deviated from its trajectory and twisted in a completely unexpected direction, piercing Mok Jiangun's thigh. As a result, Mok Jiangun also had to change his sword trajectory to block it. Clang. At that moment, thud. Wai Mengqion's heavy kick struck Mok Jiangun's abdomen. Along with that, Mok Jiangun's body was pushed back about 4 steps again. Detecting this with his hearing, Wai Mengqion's mouth corners twitched. Experience. He lacks experience. While Mok Jiangun's stances were flawless to the point of being impeccable, he was unable to respond to the variations, perhaps due to a lack of actual combat experience or battles with masters. His stances were very straightforward. Although he was responding with appropriate stances, that alone was insufficient. In the world of life and death battles, experience could not be ignored. Whoosh. Wai Mengqion caught up to Mok Jiangun, who had been pushed back, and pressured him while drawing up even more internal energy. Since he had found the opponent's weakness, he was determined to decisively push forward and settle the outcome. Fourth stance of the flashing star sword, overwhelming flash. Swish 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 swish. Wai Mengqion's sword created numerous sword shadows and pressured Mok Jiangun with a dazzling trajectory. It was an incredible swordsmanship that was hard to believe came from a blind man. Even Mok Jiangun inwardly exclaimed in admiration. Mok Jiangun had gained a keen eye for swordsmanship after viewing numerous secret manuals at the Corpse Blood Valley report. Wei Mengqian's swordsmanship was so perfected that it was difficult to find any flaws. So he felt the urge to properly clash with him. Clang 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 clang. Mok Jiangun's evil commandment sword and Wei Mengqian's bamboo sword collided, and the surroundings reverberated with the sound of metal. Their swords were moving so fast that they were invisible to the eyes of ordinary people. Swish. A sword grazed Mok Jiangun's cheek, leaving a wound. Wei Mengqian's swordsmanship once again created an unexpected variation. Interesting. It was more exciting than sparring with the Corpse Blood Valley disciples. Their attacks were more straightforward and simple, but Wei Mengqian's sword brought changes from unexpected places, pressuring him. Swish. Once again the sword brushed past Mok Jiangun's ribs. They were all narrowly grazing the vital points. If he wasn't careful, the outcome of the duel could be decided in a single moment as Wei Mengqian's sword was increasingly tightening its grip on his throat. Luck is not on my side. Wei Mengqian's face, who was pressuring Mok Jiangun, became more and more spirited. The winner of this duel was predetermined. If this were 5 or 10 years later it might be different, but the current Mok Jiangun was absolutely no match for him. He had a much greater advantage in both experience and internal energy. You are foolish, Mok Jiangun. You shouldn't have come to find me alone. He acknowledged his martial prowess that didn't match his age, but he had chosen the wrong target for revenge. If he had a cunning mind to escape from his scheme, he should have used the dead Jihang as a pretext to pressure him through his master, the Shadow Clan master. Blame that foolishness. Swish. Clang. Wei Mengqian's sword deflected Mok Jiangun's sword upward. At the same time, a decisive opening finally appeared in Mok Jiangun's defense. The corners of Wei Mengqian's mouth rose bitterly. Overconfidence in oneself. That is the cause of your defeat. Convinced that he had firmly grasped the upper hand, Wei Mengqian thrust his sword towards Mok Jiangun's neck, the decisive opening. With Mok Jiangun's current stance, it was impossible to dodge or block. It's over. Wei Mengqian's sword was about to pierce Mok Jiangun's neck. Hover. Swish. At the moment the tip of Wei Mengqian's sword touched Mok Jiangun's neck, it slid and slightly brushed the surface before passing by. What is this? Just what was going on? It was a perfect finishing strike. But why didn't it penetrate Mok Jiangun's neck and suddenly slide as if blocked by something? He couldn't understand what this phenomenon was at all. Bam. As the distance narrowed, Mok Jiangun's knee tried to kick up Wei Mengqian's chin. In response, Wei Mengqian utilized footwork with his left hand to push Mok Jiangun's knee and gain distance using the rebound. Bang. Tap 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 tap. As they distanced about 6 steps, Wei Mengqian frowned as if he couldn't understand. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't comprehend. What Mok Jiangun had just shown was an extremely advanced principle that couldn't be performed at his level. Ha! An exclamation flowed from the mouth of Chong Ryong, who was sitting on the roof smoking a pipe and watching. The reason she was so surprised was simple. He comprehended the ritual of repulsion technique. The move Mok Jiangun had just shown was none other than the ritual of repulsion technique, one of the 8 thought-shattering techniques. If the ritual of binding technique could pull anything, the ritual of repulsion technique could push away anything that touched the body. Even Chong Ryong, who had been with him all along, didn't know this. It was because Mok Jiangun hadn't mentioned it even after gaining enlightenment. Of course, there was a reason for this. It's difficult. The way the ritual of repulsion technique manifested was different from the ritual of binding technique. It could only push away something that precisely touched the body, and matching that fleeting moment when the sword was about to clash was quite difficult. And it was greatly influenced by the practitioner's capability and true energy, so the stronger the force, the harder it was to repel. That's why Wei Mengqian's sword had slid rather than being deflected. Still a long way to go. He hadn't mentioned it to Chong Ryong because he considered it an incomplete technique. Of course, it was still useful as it was. It had allowed him to deflect a fatal strike. At that moment, Wei Mengqian opened his mouth. You seem to have some tricks up your sleeve. But will the same technique work again? Whoosh. As soon as those words ended, Wei Mengqian launched his body towards Mok Jiangun. As expected of a master who had reached the transcendent realm, he had realized how to deal with the previous principle in a short time. Boom. Wei Mengqian's sword was completely covered in a blue glow. It was sword energy. He had judged that even the sliding principle wouldn't be able to handle it if the sword energy was more focused. I'll settle this. The reason he hadn't unleashed his energy until now was to protect his sword with aura. Since Mok Jiangun's evil commandment sword was even sturdier and sharper than the bamboo sword, the sword had been somewhat strained with each clash, so he had chosen this approach. However, if he turned all that energy into offensive sword energy instead of a defensive form. Clang. Bam bam bam. With just a single clash, Mok Jiangun's body was pushed back nearly 3 steps. The power had increased tremendously. However, crack. Cracks appeared on the sword. It was affected by the switch between offense and defense, but it seemed like it could endure a few stances at least. He could sufficiently settle the match within that time frame. Whoosh. Wei Mengqian tried to unleash a dominating sword stance against Mok Jiangun once more. Right at that moment. It seems your reserves have run out. What? Seeing the repetition of stances. Clang 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 clang. The moment the swords clashed, Wei Mengqian's expression distorted. He had unleashed a sword stance with sword energy, but Mok Jiangun didn't budge at all. Rather, they were evenly matched. But what was even more surprising? You bastard. Just what? The sword stance he had just unleashed was exactly the same as his own flashing star sword 7th stance, breaking the void. Right now, Mok Jiangun was performing the exact same sword stance as him. Wei Mengqian couldn't believe this situation. Swish 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 swish. He unleashed another sword stance towards Mok Jiangun, but swish 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 swish. As if he were a mirror, Mok Jiangun performed the same sword stance. For a moment, Wei Mengqian was dumbfounded. Just what was happening? His unique martial art, the flashing star sword, was a secretive sword art passed down to a single inheritor and was never revealed to the outside. Yet this fellow was imitating it. He shouldn't know the breathing technique of the stances and had only seen it for the first time while dueling. Impossible. But how could such a thing happen? Was it possible to learn the opponent's sword art in the midst of a life-and-death duel where they were trying to kill each other? Was this even possible? No matter how outstanding his talent was, wasn't there a limit? This was too unfair. Grind. After being surprised by this unprecedented situation, Wei Mengqian became enraged to the point of welling up. He detested Mok Jiangun for so easily imitating his unique sword art, which he had painstakingly mastered even after losing his sight. How dare you try to steal my sword art? It was unforgivable. Yes, then can you imitate this too? Even if you somehow imitated the external appearance of the sword art, the essence of swordsmanship wasn't acquired that way. He had completely grasped the essence of the flashing star sword by practicing it for decades, allowing him to bring various changes to his swordsmanship. Can a fellow like you imitate even these variations? Swish swish swish. What? Wei Mengqian hurriedly tilted his head to the side and launched his body backward to dodge Mok Jiangun's sword. A cold sweat dripped down his forehead as he gained distance. The 3 sword stances just now. They were variations. Even if it were him, if he were to bring variations, he would have done it the way Mok Jiangun did. Ha! What kind of fellow is this? He was imitating the variations in swordsmanship at a level nearly identical to his own. His innate martial talent alone was insufficient to describe this. He was truly a monster. Gulp. Wei Mengqian swallowed his dry saliva, perhaps out of tension. If he didn't kill the fellow here, he would become a major hindrance to the path of the second disciple, Zhang Neng. He had to kill him even at the cost of his life. He had to deal with him right away before he grew further and reached a level they couldn't even touch. Fortunately, he still had the upper hand in internal energy, so if it was now, somehow, flinch. At that moment, a chill ran down Wei Mengqian's spine. An ominous feeling enveloped his 5 senses, and it was a kind of brutality. Sensing it, Wei Mengqian hurriedly raised his sword while igniting sword energy without a moment to think. Hover. Clang. The bamboo sword wrapped in sword energy broke. Swish. Something chilling and cold brushed past his neck in an instant. Wei Mengqian instinctively hurried to grasp his neck. What? The internal energy in that last strike had surged by nearly 3 times. He was dumbfounded by the sudden increase in internal energy. Could it be that he hadn't been using his full strength until now? As he was perplexed, Mok Jiangun whispered softly in his ear. Why did someone who can't even see boast so much? If you had just kept your mouth shut, you could have at least preserved your neck longer. You bastard. Then sleep well. With those words, Mok Jiangun brought his finger to Wai Mengchion's forehead. Feeling that, Wai Mengchion inwardly cried out as if screaming, "Stop. Please. Please." Hover. Tap. Wai Mengchion's consciousness was severed in an instant. It was because Mok Jiangun had pushed Wai Mengchion's forehead, which he was barely holding with his finger. At the same time, Wai Mengchion's severed head fell limply to the ground, and blood gushed like a fountain from the cross-canyon of his neck. Splatter. Chapter 137, Shadow Clan Master 1. The Five Mountains Alliance, a group of faithful subordinates to Jiang Nung AK, the second disciple of the society leader. The severed head of Wai Mengchion, the second-ranked member known as Second Mountain, fell lifelessly to the ground as blood gushed like a fountain from his neck. Thud. Although Wai Mengchion always maintained a calm demeanor, his final expression was close to a scream. Thump. Thump. Soon Mok Jiangun's right hand, which had turned black and grotesquely swollen, returned to its original state. This was the essence of the acupoint striking technique. It was difficult to maintain for long due to its severe side effects, but it could increase one's power by 2 to 3 times for a short period. Mok Jiangun had carefully saved this technique and utilized it at the appropriate moment to behead Wai Mengchion. Swish. Chong Ryong lightly descended in front of Mok Jiangun. It was decent, but you still have a long way to go. You're right. Mok Jiangun readily admitted it. Even though his other senses were extraordinarily sharp, his opponent was a blind man. He had struggled quite a bit in a pure duel against such an opponent. Initially, he had intended to win the fight solely with the death energy from his lower Danjian and pure techniques, but as the battle prolonged, he ended up using the power of his Danjian and the acupoint striking technique. Thus, despite eliminating the target, he wasn't entirely satisfied. On the other hand, he's fast. Although Chong Ryong had said Mok Jiangun still had a long way to go, she inwardly clicked his tongue at Mok Jiangun's growth rate. Strictly speaking, the blind Wai Mengchion was a superior master compared to Mok Jiangun. He was far above in both internal energy and experience. In fact, befitting his experience, he even demonstrated the ability to pressure Mok Jiangun by using variations at every appropriate moment. However, Mok Jiangun was learning as he fought. It was admirable to witness. I thought he would struggle more. It was different from what she had expected. Due to the lack of time, even if they had fought more with just their lower Danjians, Chong Ryong thought there might have been a chance for Mok Jiangun to win. From the perspective of someone observing closely, it was a growth rate that defied explanation. Meanwhile, Mok Jiangun spoke while looking at Wai Mengchion's corpse. Ho! Why are you? Chong Ryong's eyes also widened in surprise. That's because the death energy from Wai Mengchion's corpse was gathering and condensing. What's happening? Mok Jiangun had intended to absorb the death energy before it dispersed. However, unlike before, the death energy wasn't scattering but converging. Chong Ryong chuckled and said, "It's your first time seeing this, right?" "Seeing what?" "The birth of a proper vengeful spirit." Is this it?" "That's right." Mok Jiangun, who had mastered various techniques, including the 6 people spirit summoning technique, could artificially create vengeful spirits using death energy. However, this was the first time he had witnessed one naturally forming. If that was the case, he must have felt quite wronged. Ordinary resentment isn't enough for a vengeful spirit to form. If the death energy was condensing to this extent, it meant that the resentment had reached its peak. Soon the condensed death energy began to take on a human form. The level of a vengeful spirit is determined by the strength of the obsession and resentment the individual possessed during their lifetime. Tremble. As it took shape, the handle of the broken bamboo sword trembled. A soul that has lost its physical body clings to an object to prevent itself from leaving the mortal realm. That handle was likely that object. It seems his resentment was quite strong. Chong Ryong was intrigued. Even though it was still in the process of fully taking shape, judging by the spiritual energy emanating from it, it was at least at the orange spirit level or above. The vengeful spirit finally took complete form. Grr. With flickering white eyes, Wai Mengchion glared at Mok Jiangun. How unjust. How unfair. I wanted to follow that person, achieve great things and open my eyes, but to die like this and become a ghost. A voice filled with resentment. Why Mengqion didn't take his eyes off Mok Jiangun. In death I get to see the face of my enemy. I curse you. I will follow you until you die and torment you. Why Mengqion, who was speaking, suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Something was strange. As he had become a vengeful spirit naturally, he was aware of his own death. Thus he also instinctively understood the principles of the boundary between the living and the dead. However, why did he feel like Mok Jiangun was making eye contact with his dead self? At that moment, you seem to have a lot to say. A newly formed vengeful spirit is quite talkative. Could it be that you can see me? If I can see you, that's why I'm responding like this, right? You did this to me. Realizing that Mok Jiangun could see him, Wai Mengqion, filled with even more rage, lunged at Mok Jiangun with the intent to kill. At that instant, grab. Ugh. Wai Mengqion's white pupils trembled. It was because Mok Jiangun had suddenly grabbed his neck. What is this? He was a dead man. How could Mok Jiangun grab the neck of his dead self? What the hell are you? How? As he was utterly baffled, a voice from behind startled Wai Mengqion. Hey youngster. For someone whose corpse hasn't even gone cold, you sure are lively. Vengeful spirits can instinctively distinguish levels. Wai Mengqion's mind grew hazy from the immense spiritual pressure he felt from behind. What kind of energy is this? This wasn't just a simple vengeful spirit level but a calamity level existence. His spirit body trembled and his lips wouldn't close. To the terrified Wai Mengqion, Mok Jiangun said, "This is the first time I've seen a case of someone becoming a vengeful spirit like this. What should I do?" What do you mean, what should you do? Just absorb the death energy and exorcise it. Ah, right. That would be better. Squish. With that, Mok Jiangun raised his death energy and tried to apply more force to Wai Mengqion's neck. At first, Wai Mengqion didn't understand what exorcism meant. Sizzle. However, along with a strange sense of pain, he felt a threat as if his spirit body was gradually disappearing. It instilled an even more intense fear than when he had faced death. Wai Mengqion hurriedly cried out, "Spare me. You're already dead. Please give me a chance. Would a chance hold much meaning for you? I don't wish for anything else. Just let me see the faces of my wife and child one last time. Then I'll accept exorcism or whatever else." Wife and child. Mok Jiangun tilted his head slightly as if puzzled. Wai Mengqion spoke in a pleading voice. "Long ago, after losing my eyesight to the glorious snake poison, I had a single wish. It was to see the faces of my wife and child. This was true. Wai Mengqion had an earnest desire. It was to somehow cure his blinded eyes and see the faces of his family. Jiang Nungake, the second disciple of the society leader, had promised Wai Mengqion that if he achieved great things, he would help him find the medicine immortal He Yang to restore his eyesight, which had been blinded by poison, though it was uncertain whether it would be possible. But who would have known that he would be able to see after dying? "I beg you. I can't leave this world like this. If you grant me this, you can kill me or do whatever you want." He had no significant lingering attachments to anything else. Wai Mengqion simply wanted to see the faces of his wife and child whom he had never seen while alive. As he expressed his wish, the corner of Mok Jiangun's mouth curled up. "Ah, I thought you became a vengeful spirit solely due to resentment, but there were also precious beings who left you with lingering attachments in life." Gasp. At Mok Jiangun's words, Wai Mengqion instantly realized his mistake. He had said those words out of fear of being extinguished and a desire to resolve his only lingering attachment, but upon reflection, it wasn't something he should have asked of this bastard. Wasn't this bastard the very culprit who had killed him? As he thought he had made a mistake, Mok Jiangun whispered in his ear, just like before killing him. "That's fortunate. Then you'll be able to work a bit more voluntarily compared to other spirit servants." What the hell was he talking about now? As he was puzzled, Wai Mengqion noticed Chong Ryong looking at him with sympathetic eyes. Mok Jiangun, who had finished his business outside and returned from his outing. As he was about to pass through the entrance pavilion leading to his private residence, Mok Jiangun's eyes narrowed. He lightly scanned the surroundings and immediately noticed that the guard warriors who were supposed to be protecting the area had disappeared. The people who should have been there were absent. Smirking, Mok Jae-un entered the building of his private residence as if he didn't mind. Walking along the corridor, he opened the door to a room. "You're late." As the door opened, a familiar voice came from inside. It was none other than the Shadow Clan master. Surprise flickered in Mok Jae-un's eyes. He had dismissed everyone earlier without much explanation, so why was he waiting alone for Mok Jae-un? There was no presence felt within a radius of about 20 zhang around them. Puzzled, Mok Jae-un was about to clasp his hands and bow in greeting, but the Shadow Clan master interrupted him. "Where have you been?" "Training." "You don't need to make such a flimsy lie about being at the market." The clan master's voice was unusually heavy and cold, different from his usual demeanor. It seemed to be an extension of his earlier behavior. The clan master tapped his finger on the table and continued. "How far did you go with the head of the intruder?" Mok Jae-un feigned ignorance and nonchalantly replied. "I have no idea what you're talking about, master." The head was missing from the crematorium at the clan master's words. Mok Jae-un licked his lips and fell silent. It seemed that the clan master had personally checked the crematorium after Mok Jae-un's visit. Mok Jae-un shrugged and said, "I apologize, but I don't understand why you're asking me about it. I did leave the residence briefly, but if you ask the guard warriors, I still can't comprehend it even after pondering." "What? What kind of trick did you use? What trick are you referring to?" At Mok Jae-un's counter-question, the clan master sighed and shook his head. Then he stood up from his seat and spoke. "There's something called a sense of discomfort or unease. It was small at first, making it difficult to notice, but at some point, the surroundings centered around you became engulfed in that unease." The clan master found it puzzling. The members of the Shadow Clan were thoroughly trained in mental discipline, as they also acted as spies and handled confidential matters. Thus, there was a belief that they would never betray the sect. But how was this possible? It had only been 7 days. Within this short period, how could they have been swayed by Mok Jae-un, who was merely a hostage of the righteous faction? "I don't know what strange technique you used, but even though you've become an official disciple, it seems you've crossed a line that can't be overlooked." Shing. The sound of something being drawn was heard. It was the sound of a blade being unsheathed from the scabbard at the clan master's waist. In an instant, the sharp blade was pressed against the underside of Mok Jae-un's chin. Swish. Mok Jae-un's eyes narrowed. He had anticipated a certain gap in strength, but the clan master's martial prowess was incomparable to Wei Mingqion, who was a subordinate of Jang Nung-ak, the second disciple of the society leader. "He's strong." With pure martial arts from the lower Danjian alone, it was utterly impossible to do anything against him. At that moment, the clan master spoke in an even colder voice. "Depending on your answer, I may have to behead you. So from now on, I'd like you to respond clearly to my questions." Before he could finish his sentence, the clan master frowned. It was because Mok Jae-un had laughed. Seeing this, the clan master recalled the smile filled with malice that Mok Jae-un had shown when he beheaded the intruder to quell the confusion. It was the first time he had felt a chill down his spine and sensed danger upon seeing someone smile. The clan master's grip on the blade tightened. "That smile just now. Your intuition is quite sharp. To reach such a conclusion based on a mere sense of unease. So, are you going to behead me?" At that question, the clan master's gaze sharpened. Mok Jae-un's response just now was tantamount to affirming that the clan master's suspicions were correct. Although he didn't reveal how he had done it. One thing was certain. This child was truly dangerous. It wasn't simply because he was a hostage of the righteous faction or had outstanding talent, but the person himself was completely different from the ordinary. "It seems it would be beneficial for the sect to behead you right now." "Perhaps." The clan master inwardly clicked his tongue at Mok Jae-un's composed reaction. He had to admit, the child had guts to show such composure even when his life was being threatened. However, merit was merit and death was death. If this child was left unchecked, that sense of unease would engulf the entire Shadow Clan. Grip. The clan master gripped the blade's handle, ready to exert force. It was at that very moment. "But you know, if you behead me, everyone will find out that master is a worshipper of fire. I wonder if that would be all right." The clan master's expression instantly stiffened. "This bastard. How does he know that?" Chapter 138, Shadow Clan Master 2. Just an hour and 15 minutes ago. Mok Jang-un sighed lightly as he looked at the window paper, illuminated by the surrounding torches. Things were unfolding just as he had anticipated. Mok Jang-un glanced at the scroll he held in his left hand. It was something that the evil spirit possessing Bayok, the bodyguard of the Shadow Clan Master, had secretly brought. Every day at the same time the Shadow Clan Master repeatedly read this scroll. I think I should read it now. You should. Judging by the situation, it seemed there wouldn't be an opportunity to examine it leisurely. And if he were to be caught with it during a room search, things would escalate further. With that, Mok Jang-un unrolled the scroll. Rustle. It was quite worn, indicating how much it had been handled. The half-unrolled scroll. The evil spirit possessing Bayok frowned upon seeing it. This is. The evil spirit had only seen the Shadow Clan Master reading it but had never seen its contents. So he had no idea what it was about. However, it's not our language. Surprisingly, the scroll was not written in Hanyu Chinese, but in an utterly unrecognizable script. Chong Ryong, seeing it for the first time as well, tilted his head while holding his pipe. The curvy writing was difficult to find any regularity in, making it unlikely to be a secret code. If that was the case, it might not be a language from the Central Plains. Oh, this looks like the language of Persia. What? Chong Ryong's eyes widened as she stared at Mok Jang-un. The country known as Persia or Parsa was a place he knew to be located on the northern coast beyond the western regions, not in the Central Plains. Kid, can you read this? Roughly, yes. What? How could this kid read it? As she was puzzled, Mok Jang-un scratched his head and said, My grandfather taught me. Grandfather? Yes. He taught me a few languages besides Hanyu. He said it would be helpful for studying medicine from the western regions. Huh. He taught the language of Persia, which might never be used in a lifetime, just to teach medicine? Chong Ryong became curious about what kind of person Mok Jang-un's grandfather was. But that wasn't important right now. What does it say? Well, it seems to be some kind of poetic verse. This body, burned in the sacred fire, has no attachment to life and death. On the path I wish to take, I illuminate the light. Enough. Pardon. I understand. You do. Yes. I thought it might be a martial arts verse, but it's not. This is a scripture. Scripture. A scripture like a Buddhist sutra, isn't it a text used for religious prayers? What kind of scripture was this? As Mok Jang-un was puzzled, Chong Ryong clicked his tongue and said, It's truly deplorable. The head of the confidential information department in the sect is a worshipper of fire. Worshipper of fire. Something came to Mok Jang-un's mind as he tilted his head. It was the word Beiwa mentioned in the conversation between the Shadow Clan Master and the External Affairs Director. Beiwa literally meant bowing to fire. Could it be related to this scripture about worshipping fire? Worship. Beiv 1. Huh. How do you know about the Beiwa faith? Beiwa faith? What's that? This scripture. It seems to be a scripture of the Beiwa faith. Beiwa faith. Ah. Unlike Mok Jang-un, who was questioning, the evil spirit also nodded as if he knew something. Chong Ryong puffed on his pipe and explained to the puzzled Mok Jang-un, They'll likely break in soon, so I'll give you a brief explanation. The Beiwa faith is literally a religious group that reveres fire. They worship a god from the western regions that you've never heard of. A god from the western regions? Yes. It's a kind of impure heresy. Well, it's tiresome to discuss such things. At one point, this Beiwa faith entered the Central Plains and spread among the common people. Most religions were like that. They started from the lowest class, the commoners. Those who had nowhere to rely on and were impoverished wanted to hold on to something and rise. As the doctrine of the Beiwa faith spread, it suddenly grew rapidly and became a threat to those who believed in Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism as their core principles. A threat. Rather than a threat, wouldn't they have viewed it unfavorably? Anything new was bound to face rejection in some way. Listening to the story, it doesn't seem to have had a good outcome. That's right. They were accused of deceiving the world and misleading the people, leading to a massive crackdown. That was about 100 years ago. But I didn't know there were still people who believed in the Beiwa faith, let alone someone in charge of information and secrets in the Heaven and Earth Society. Chong Ryong spoke as if disappointed. From this, it seemed that she also didn't view the Beiwa faith favorably. If a dead spirit like her felt this way, it could be imagined how most people would think about this religious group. At that moment, a shout was heard from outside. "Intruder, listen up. If you don't surrender immediately, we will shoot to kill." Mok Jae-eun tried to roll up the scroll again. But as he did so, something fell out from inside and was about to hit the floor. He caught it as if snatching it midair. Tap. What was this? Along with this word, something was written below. Rather than a doctrine, it seemed to be giving a strong warning. Mok Jae-eun stared at it intently, then inserted the paper with that word back into the scroll and handed it to the evil spirit. Back to the present. The Shadow Clan master gripped the blade's handle, ready to exert force. It was at that very moment. "But you know, if you behead me, everyone will find out that master is a worshipper of fire. I wonder if that would be all right." At those words, the Shadow Clan master's expression stiffened. Seeing his reaction, a glimmer of surprise flashed in Mok Jae-eun's eyes. His prediction was indeed correct. When he mentioned reciting the scripture at a similar time every day, Chong Ryong had said that the Shadow Clan master might be a believer of the Baiwa faith, a religion that worships fire. Slam. At that moment, the Shadow Clan master grabbed Mok Jae-eun by the collar and roughly shoved him against the wall. Bang. His characteristic demeanor that seemed infinitely light had completely vanished, and he glared with eyes filled with murderous intent as he spoke. "You bastard! Where did you hear such a rumor?" "A rumor." Slice. The blade slightly dug into Mok Jae-eun's neck. If he slashed here, his neck would be cut. Mok Jae-eun chuckled and said, "If it's a rumor, you could just laugh it off. Why are you overreacting like this?" "You." Stab. The blade dug deeper into Mok Jae-eun's neck. It was to clearly show that he could kill him. However, this kid. The Shadow Clan master's eyes sharpened. Even when his life was in immediate danger, Mok Jae-eun still maintained a smile. It wasn't because he was confident that the Shadow Clan master wouldn't slash him. It seemed as if he had no attachment to his life or wasn't afraid of death at all. This was the first time he had seen someone like this. "Aren't you afraid?" "Of what?" "That you might die at any moment." "If I die, I die. If I live, I live. What more is there to think about?" At Mok Jae-eun's words, the Shadow Clan master fell silent. Then, after glaring at Mok Jae-eun for a moment, he spoke again. "You said everyone would find out if you killed me. Have you told this to anyone else?" The Shadow Clan master's eyes trembled slightly as he asked this. He was worried that someone else might already know. Mok Jae-eun smiled and said, "Who knows? Maybe I said that because those who should know already know." Thud. Ugh. As soon as he finished speaking, the Shadow Clan master's hand struck Mok Jae-eun's abdomen. It looked like a simple strike, but the impact spread inward, causing pain throughout his internal organs. But it didn't end there. Twist. The Shadow Clan master grabbed Mok Jae-eun's abdomen with his 5 fingers and twisted it as if turning. As the muscles twisted, immense pain surged through him. "If you don't speak properly right now, you..." The Shadow Clan master frowned as he spoke. This technique was something he had personally devised as a master of torture, maximizing pain by inducing internal pain and then twisting the muscles. It was a method as painful as bone breaking and muscle tearing. But there was no change in Mok Jae-eun's expression. This kid. Except for briefly holding his breath the moment the internal pain was inflicted, he maintained a smile amidst this tremendous pain. What kind of person was he? Drip. At that moment, blood flowed from Mok Jae-eun's mouth. It was a natural phenomenon since he had suffered internal injuries. He was such a vicious person that his expression didn't change even when he was in pain and bleeding. The more he learned about him, the more he realized that this kid was truly unique in many ways. From his martial arts talent to everything else. Although it was a pity this secret must never be revealed. "Tell me who you told. Then I'll spare your life." "You shouldn't do that." "What?" "If you find out who I told, you'll have to kill that person and me too. That's how a secret disappears, right?" Twist. The Shadow Clan master twisted Mok Jae-eun's abdominal muscles even more. And he pressed on in a low voice. "Who are you trying to teach?" "I'm not trying to teach you. I just said that because you were telling such an obvious lie about sparing my life." "You." Mocking him in this situation? It was incomprehensible what he was doing in a situation where provoking the other party would bring no benefit. Even if he wasn't afraid of death, this was going too far. It was then. This body, burned in the sacred fire, has no attachment to life and death. On the path I wish to take, I illuminate the light. Joy and sorrow shall remain as mere dust. Pity the troubled sentient beings. At the scripture recited from Mok Jaeongun's mouth, the Shadow Clan master's expression froze. How did this kid know the scripture, the doctrine of the Baiwa faith? The Shadow Clan master couldn't hide his bewilderment. How could it be? It was absolutely impossible for him to have seen his scripture. Even if he had seen it, it was written in the language of Persia, the predecessor of the Baiwa faith, so only a handful of people in the Central Plains, let alone within the Heaven and Earth Society, could read it. Even among the few remaining believers of the Baiwa faith, who had barely survived the persecution, most couldn't read it properly, so how could this kid recite it? That was absolutely not the case. But how could he recite the contents of the scripture so fluently and accurately? Unless he already knew. Release. The Shadow Clan master hurriedly removed his hand completely from Mok Jaeongun's abdomen and said, "Could it be that you're a believer of our faith?" Chapter 139, Shadow Clan Master 3. After nearly 100 years of constant persecution, few believers of the Baiwa faith could read the original scriptures, even among the surviving members. The Shadow Clan master didn't think Mok Jaeongun would be able to read the original text in the Persian language. Persian was unexpectedly difficult to learn, and experts in it were extremely rare throughout the Central Plains. Assuming all of this, it meant that Mok Jaeongun already knew the doctrine of the scripture. Release. The Shadow Clan master hurriedly removed his hand completely from Mok Jaeongun's abdomen and said, "Could it be that you're a believer of our faith?" Believer. At the Shadow Clan master's question, Mok Jaeongun's eyes sparkled. He had predicted various scenarios of how the Shadow Clan master would react if he recited the contents of the scripture, and quite an interesting reaction had emerged. "Don't tell me you're planning to pretend to be a believer?" Chong Ryong clicked her tongue and spoke. She didn't approve of Mok Jaeongun getting involved with the Baiwa faith. "And it's your choice if you want to deceive him. But how much do you think you can deceive him with just one scripture? A suspicious eunuch like him will quickly see through it." "Well, if it's just that, it might be possible." The Shadow Clan master was in charge of information and spies in the Shadow Clan. Regardless of his hidden identity, he was a suspicious person, so if Mok Jaeongun clumsily pushed forward as a believer, he could be easily exposed, as Chong Ryong warned. Deception is a gamble. The way to increase the probability of that gamble is to base it on as much truth as possible. With that, Mok Jaeongun, who knows what? Although I have received teachings about the scripture, it's difficult to call myself a believer with just that. At Mok Jaeongun's words, one of the Shadow Clan master's eyebrows arched up. What was this kid saying now? He received teachings about the scripture? What do you mean by that? It's exactly as I said. I received teachings about the scripture, but I didn't become a believer. If I had to specify, should I say I'm a follower? Follower. There is a strict difference between a believer and a follower. A believer is someone who is completely subordinate to the faith and works for it. On the other hand, a follower refers to someone who believes in the religious group and its doctrine. Follower. With that, the Shadow Clan master asked in a voice filled with suspicion. "You said you're a follower, so who taught you about our faith scripture?" "I don't know." "What? You don't know?" What was he saying now? Mok Jaeongun shrugged and said, "The old master who taught me the scripture didn't tell me his name." "He didn't tell you his name?" "Yes. He firmly refused to tell me. He said if I knew his name I would face the same difficulties as him." At Mok Jaeongun's words, the Shadow Clan master's eyes narrowed. The Baiwa faith had long been heavily persecuted, so most of its believers were organized in small groups, and sometimes they didn't even know each other's identities. There's some truth to that. There was no way he would reveal his true identity to a non-believer. However, as a high-ranking position of father, he had some knowledge of the identities of important believers in each base. "Do you remember the appearance of the old master you met?" At the Shadow Clan master's question, Mok Jaeongun casually replied. He had a face full of age spots and a thick gray beard that reached his chest. Any other distinguishing features? It was impossible to identify someone with just that. Wasn't what he just described a natural phenomenon of aging that occurs with age? Mok Jae-un shrugged and said. His thick beard and long eyebrows covered half of his face, and he had a shabby appearance, so it's difficult for me to describe any specific features. There's no way to know who he is like that. Of course not. But would someone who doesn't even teach his name carelessly show his proper appearance? At Mok Jae-un's words, the Shadow Clan master's eyes narrowed. It was definitely a valid point, but he couldn't trust it. The Shadow Clan master spoke in a sharp voice. Do you think I would readily believe that you received teachings about our faith scripture from an old master whose name and face you don't even know? Of course, it would be hard for you to believe. Then why would I? I received teachings about the scripture from him in the original language. The Shadow Clan master frowned. Receiving teachings about the scripture in the original language meant he had learned it in Persian, not Hanyu, Chinese. If he knew the original text to that extent, he was definitely not an ordinary believer. But there was no proper evidence. As if reading his thoughts, Mok Jae-un turned his head and pointed to the desk with his eyes. On the desk were writing tools. Seeing his intention to write, the Shadow Clan master glared at Mok Jae-un's face for a moment before releasing his remaining hand that was grabbing his collar. Try writing it. Mok Jae-un went to the desk, poured water to grind the ink, dipped the brush in the ink and began writing on the paper. Swish. This body burned in the sacred fire has no attachment to life and death. On the path I wish to take I illuminate the light. Joy and sorrow shall remain as mere dust. Pity the troubled sentient beings. The Shadow Clan master's eyes trembled rapidly as he watched this. The gaze that had been filled with disbelief until before Mok Jae-un started writing changed in an instant. How can this be? This wasn't a handwriting that could be written by clumsily memorizing the shape, but one that required proper learning. If one drew the strokes like a picture, it couldn't be written like this. The Shadow Clan master, who had studied the Persian language for a long time, was even more certain of it. He must have learned from a believer of at least father level. Otherwise there was no way he could write Persian so skillfully. The Shadow Clan master, who had been looking at the scripture written in Persian with amazement, turned his gaze to Mok Jae-un. This could be definitive proof. Why would Mok Jae-un, a 17-year-old from a renowned martial arts family in Anhui province, learn Persian and use it for anything? Chong Ryong clicked her tongue as he witnessed this scene. Thanks to Jae-un's proficiency in Persian, that suspicious eunuch was gradually lowering his guard. After all, unless one was a merchant or an interpreter authorized to trade across the western regions, there would be no reason to learn Persian. It was truly a coincidence that he had learned it from his so-called grandfather. At that moment, the Shadow Clan master spoke. The believer who taught you Persian must have been at least a father. Father. A high-ranking believer who can give teachings about the scripture in our faith. Is that so? Yes. Those who can teach in the original language are few now, so it would have been better if you knew his name. The Shadow Clan master clicked his tongue as if genuinely regretting it. Then he asked, did he only teach you the scripture and Persian? At this question, Mok Jae-un hesitated for a moment as if he had been waiting for it and opened his mouth. Now that I think about it, he seemed to be searching for something. Searching for something? Yes. My memory is hazy, but at that time I heard him clearly say, all right. He said he was searching for the incarnation of Armin. At those words, the Shadow Clan master's eyes widened in surprise. Mok Jae-un had anticipated that the Shadow Clan master would react this way. That's because that sentence at the beginning of the paper inserted between the original scripture. That word was Armin. He hadn't even told Chong Ryong about the interpretation of it, but beware, for the incarnation of Armin may appear in this world. It had a sentence of warning written on it. It seemed to be some kind of revelation within the Beiwa faith. He thought this also had value in using it, and judging by the Shadow Clan master's reaction, it seemed successful. It was then. Grab. The Shadow Clan master grabbed Mok Jae-un's shoulder and spoke, unable to hide his excitement. I think I know who taught you the original text. What? He knows who taught this. It was truly an absurd situation to say he knew who a non-existent imaginary person was. However, Mok Jae-un didn't show it. Regardless, the Shadow Clan master had a completely excited expression. Only 2 guardians, including myself, have heard the revelation of the holy fire that he prophesied. Among them, only Guardian Jiang is over 60 years old. If what Mok Jiangun said was true, it had to be Guardian Jiang. He had been discouraged, thinking that both guardians had died after his disappearance. But if this was true, it was a great relief. If you received teachings from him, you can't be considered a mere follower. You also have the qualification to be a father. He has the qualification to be a father? Who did he guess it was to have this reaction? Although puzzled, Mok Jiangun casually expressed humility. I only learned the scripture, so how can I have the qualification to be a father? But you said you think you know who it is. Since he kept it a secret from you until the end, it's difficult to tell you right away. But one thing is certain. He is a very high-ranking person in our faith. Ah. Do you happen to know where he went after teaching you the scripture? I apologize, but I don't know. He suddenly disappeared one day. Ah. At Mok Jiangun's words, the Shadow Clan master couldn't hide his disappointment. Still, he thought he should find solace in the fact that the guardian whom he had thought dead was alive. As he was thinking that, Mok Jiangun spoke to him in a low voice. But before the old master disappeared, he left something behind. He left something behind? Yes. What is it? The Shadow Clan master asked in a voice filled with anticipation, thinking it might be a clue. It was a sentence written in Persian, but it was so vague that I couldn't understand its meaning. He wrote it in Persian? Try writing it. With that, Mok Jiangun picked up the brush and wrote a word. Seeing this, the Shadow Clan master frowned. Then he soon opened his mouth and muttered, "Blade of the soul?" That's what it would be if directly translated from Persian. What does this mean? After pondering for a moment, he spoke as if he had realized something. Ghost blade. The blade of the soul could also be called the ghost blade. If it was according to the sentence he had left, the only thing that immediately came to mind was the ghost blade, one of the 8 stars who was called the current supreme master of the martial arts world. At the Shadow Clan master's speculation, the corner of Mok Jiangun's mouth curled up. Ha! Seeing this, Chong Ryong sincerely clicked her tongue. What a truly absurd guy. He created a plausible lie based on the information he knew, matching the Shadow Clan master's reactions, and now he was leading the situation as he intended. He intends to make this ball-less search for the ghost blade.